I went to the hospital for the birth of my granddaughter, but my heart was torn between the joy of her arrival and the fear because my daughter was in the ICU, fighting for her life. Amid this nightmare, my son-in-law confronted me in the hallway. The coldness in his gaze chilled my soul when he said, "I don't care about them. Just get lost and take that baby with you." Hearing that about my own wife and newborn granddaughter awakened a fury in me I had never known. Without arguing, I left the hospital and made a call. At that very moment, I took back the apartment that was in my name and where he lived. The next day, he felt firsthand what it means to be discarded and homeless. With my heart in my throat and the scent of antiseptic invading my lungs, I walked the cold hospital corridors. Each step toward the ICU was a silent prayer. My daughter, my only treasure, was fighting for her life after a delivery that had nearly taken her, and my granddaughter, a being so small and fragile, was breathing with the help of machines in an incubator. I, Helena, at 68 years old, a woman who built an empire from scratch, who had always controlled every aspect of my life with a firm hand and a strategic mind, felt utterly powerless. But the real storm wasn't brewing in the incessantly beeping heart monitors. It was in my son-in-law's eyes when I found him in the hallway. He didn't look like a worried husband. There was a coldness, an impatience in his gaze that sent a chill down my spine. His blue eyes, once so bright when he courted my daughter, now looked like two chips of ice. His impeccable suit, which once denoted success, now seemed like a costume, a well-constructed facade to hide an alarming emptiness. He didn't even make a move to approach, his arms crossed over his chest, an invisible barrier between us. That hospital, which should have been a sanctuary of hope, suddenly transformed into a stage for a dark revelation. The breath caught in my throat, a tight knot of apprehension. I, who had faced down corporate boards and multi-million-dollar negotiations, felt the ground shift beneath my feet. Before I could ask about my daughter, about the faint pulse that insisted on defying the machine, about my granddaughter's fragility, about any trace of humanity or paternal concern, he fired the words that would change everything. His voice was low, so low it was almost lost in the constant hum of the equipment, but each syllable was as sharp as broken glass. "I don't care about them," he said, without a single tremor in his voice. My ears registered the words, but my mind refused to process them. It was as if all the oxygen had been sucked from the room, leaving me dizzy, disoriented. "Get them out of my life. Just disappear and take that baby with you." The world stopped. The ringing in my ears was louder than the hospital alarms, louder than my own racing pulse. In that instant, the pain morphed into a cold, calculating fury. It wasn't the kind of uncontrolled rage that blinds you. It was the kind that brings clarity, that sharpens the senses. He didn't see the woman who loved him, the mother of his child, the woman who idolized him. He didn't see his own daughter, an innocent and helpless being, fighting for every breath. He saw a burden, a problem that disrupted his plans. He dared to tell me to get them out of my life, as if they were disposable objects, as if the lives of two precious creatures could simply be swept under the rug. A shiver ran down my spine, but it wasn't from fear. It was from cold determination. He didn't know who he was dealing with. He thought I was just his wife's mother, a worried grandmother, an old woman who would bend to his cruelty. He had forgotten I owned the roof over his head, that I had built every brick of my life with sweat and savvy. That man, with his arrogance and cruel indifference, had underestimated the strength of a mother, of a grandmother. He had underestimated the woman I am. Every one of his words was etched into my memory, not as an open wound, but as fuel for the battle to come. The image of my daughter, pale and connected to tubes, and my granddaughter, so small and frail inside the incubator, projected onto my mind. strengthening my resolve. There was no room for hesitation, for self-pity. That hospital, a silent witness to his depravity, would also be the place where my promise of protection was forged. An unbreakable promise. That night, I barely slept. My mind was a whirlwind of plans, strategies, scenarios. I replayed his every word, every gesture, every micro-expression I had caught. The cold fury propelled me, kept me alert. What had been maternal concern had now transformed into a rescue mission. I had to protect my family, not just from physical fragility, but from the cruelty of a man who had revealed himself to be a monster. Dawn seemed an eternity away, but I knew that with it would come the start of my counter-offensive. He had declared war, but he had no idea of the arsenal I possessed. For him, the game had just begun. But for me, the first piece on my chessboard was about to move, and he would not be prepared for the play. The next morning would bring not just the sun, it would bring the end of his stay under my roof, and the start of a new phase in a game he had completely underestimated. The next morning, as the sun rose, painting the horizon in hues of pink and gold, the first piece on my chessboard moved. The quiet of the hospital, which had once housed my anguish, was now filled with a steely determination. I had spent the night awake, not in sorrow, but in planning. Every detail had been meticulously calculated, every move anticipated. The scene that would unfold at the luxury apartment, the home my daughter and he had built, or rather, the one I had provided, would be swift, precise, and undeniably humiliating. He didn't have to pack his bags, because a sheriff's deputy and 2 burly security guards were waiting for him at the door. The shock on his face when he opened the door and saw the imposing figures was almost gratifying. His expression, once so controlled and arrogant, crumbled into a mixture of disbelief and fury. He shouted, he threatened, his eyes widening with rage as the deputy read the court order. "This is absurd! I live here. You can't do this!" he bellowed, trying to shove past the guards. But they were like concrete walls, impassive. I had anticipated his reaction. My lawyers had worked through the night, ensuring everything was legally airtight. After all, the apartment was in my name. It was quick, clinical, and for him, devastatingly humiliating. The locks were changed before he could even grab his most expensive suit. His threats dissipated into thin air, powerless against the force of the law and my planning. That was just the beginning, a full stop to his stay under my roof. I moved my daughter and granddaughter, as soon as they were discharged, to one of my most secluded properties, a house far from the city bustle, nestled among the rolling hills and pine forests of upstate New York, where the air was pure and the memories would be ours alone, fresh and untouched by the shadows of the past. It was a refuge, a sanctuary. My daughter, still frail, looked like a porcelain doll, her movements slow and careful. The little one in my arms, a bundle of tenderness, slept soundly, oblivious to the turmoil surrounding her. I thought the nightmare was over, that peace would settle in our haven. But it was merely the first act of a war he was determined to win at any cost, a silent battle that would unfold behind the scenes. The first week was marked by an eerie silence, the calm before the storm. My son-in-law vanished, and for a foolish moment, I confess, I believed he had accepted defeat. I tried to convince myself he had realized the gravity of his actions and chosen to walk away. The country house offered a respite, a temporary relief for frayed nerves. The singing of birds and the whisper of the wind through the trees were a balm to my exhausted soul. I devoted myself to my daughter's recovery and the care of my granddaughter, trying to fill the days with affection and hope, pushing away the shadow that loomed over us. It was then that the quiet was shattered, not by a sound, but by a disturbing discovery. During one of my trips to the apartment to organize my daughter's belongings, I came across proof of his insidious cruelty. He hadn't just left. He had vandalized it in a cruel, psychological way, hidden in the closet, among clothes he hadn't had time to take. I found their wedding album, torn apart, every page, a piece of a happy memory, violated, and most shockingly, my daughter's face had been methodically cut out of every single photograph. It wasn't random destruction, but a clear, cold, and calculated message. It was as if he wanted to erase her existence, to invalidate every moment they had lived. As fury once again simmered within me, I watched my daughter, still fragile, defending her husband. Her eyes, once filled with sadness, now shone with a deceptive hope. "He must be in shock, Mom," she would say, her voice trembling. "He wouldn't do this out of malice. He loves me." This denial was my first great obstacle, a wall I had to break down. I had to fight for a daughter who didn't yet understand she needed to be saved. A battle not only against him, but against the illusion that imprisoned her. The real fight wouldn't just be a legal one, but a battle on the minefield of her heart. And then, the sound of the doorbell at the country house brought me back to reality, a summons in hand, tearing through the veil of illusory peace and revealing that the enemy was ready for a new attack, more audacious and unexpected than I could have ever imagined. The tranquility was shattered abruptly and shrilly. The doorbell rang with an insistence that announced more than a simple visit. Opening the door, a process server handed me a heavy envelope bearing the court's letterhead. My heart tightened, but my expression remained impassive. With steady hands, I broke the seal, and what I found inside made my blood run cold. A summons. He had filed a lawsuit, and not for divorce, as one might expect. No, he wanted full custody of my granddaughter. His audacity was unbelievable. The allegations were an absurdity, a web of lies so well crafted it was perverse. He claimed my daughter was mentally unstable, incapable of caring for the baby, and that I, her own mother, had kidnapped her, holding her captive in an isolated estate. In that cold, formal document, he painted himself as the victim, a desperate father fighting to rescue his child from the clutches of a controlling mother-in-law. His manipulative charm, which had once ensnared my daughter, now extended to official channels. To my horror, I discovered he had convinced a social worker that his story was plausible, that he was the loving father and I, the villain. Suddenly, I was no longer the protector, the matriarch fighting for her family. I was the kidnapper, the woman tearing a father away from his daughter. The injustice burned inside me, a cold fire of indignation. As I tried to process the gravity of the situation, another blow landed. Reviewing my daughter's financial records, something I should have done much sooner, I discovered a massive hole in her savings. The bank statements revealed exorbitant monthly transfers to his account. My daughter, in her naivety and love, wasn't just funding his luxuries. She was paying for a secret I did not yet know, a hidden debt he seemed to carry, and which now rested on her shoulders. The truth unfolded before my eyes, revealing a plot of exploitation and manipulation that left me breathless. My daughter, so pure and trusting, had been easy prey in his hands. The man hadn't just discarded her, he had drained her, financially and emotionally. The image of her, still so weakened by the pregnancy and delivery, drove me to fight with even more vehemence. I had to unmask him, not just to protect my granddaughter, but to free my daughter from the invisible prison he had built around her. The second twist came from where I least expected it, striking at the heart of my confidence and support network. My trusted attorney, Mr. Davies, the man who had handled my family's affairs for decades, who had stood by me in every legal and business battle, dropped my case. The news blindsided me, a low and unexpected blow. He called me, his voice strained and laden with a guilt that was palpable even over the phone. "Conflict of interest," he said, unable to meet my eyes when we met briefly at his office. His shoulders were tense, his expression troubled. I had known him long enough to know there was something more, an invisible pressure, a hidden power forcing him to retreat. I was left alone, exposed, like a fortress wall that suddenly loses a piece of its foundation. The shock was immense. My stronghold, built with years of care and loyalty, seemed to be crumbling around me. That's when the real attack began, an attack aimed not just at me, but at my reputation and my sanity. My son-in-law, with his knack for manipulation and his talent for cruelty, launched an online smear campaign. He posted family photos, the kind that radiated a manufactured happiness, accompanied by saccharine, false captions about how a monstrous mother-in-law was destroying his home, separating him from his beloved wife and daughter. He was the suffering father, the wronged husband. The internet, that tool of connection, became a weapon in his hands. Friends, colleagues, and even distant relatives, people I knew and trusted, started to call. Their voices, once warm, now carried a tone of questioning, of doubt. The pressure was immense, and I saw doubt begin to corrode the trust of my own daughter, who spent hours on her phone, likely exchanging messages with him, her mind still caught in his web of lies, her heart broken by the distorted narrative he presented. I felt like I was losing control of everything, and time was running out. I had to act, and fast, before his toxic influence completely took over what was left of my family and turned me into the villain of my own story. And then, a distant memory, a small detail from my life years ago, began to form in my mind, a spark of hope in the darkness that surrounded me, a chance for a comeback that I couldn't quite decipher yet, but that pushed me to keep going. The pressure mounted, suffocating like a stone embrace. The calls from friends, the suspicious glances from acquaintances I ran into, all contributed to a sense of isolation. I, who had always been seen as an unshakable woman, now found myself questioned, judged. But the sharpest pain was seeing the confusion in my daughter's eyes. She spent hours on the phone, and even without hearing the conversations, I knew it was him. Her face, once a canvas of sadness, was now colored with a mix of hope and guilt, a slow-acting poison he was injecting from a distance. In my desperation, searching for any evidence against him, any thread that could unravel this web of lies, I decided to revisit the now empty apartment. I walked through the silent rooms, each one echoing with memories, once happy, now stained by betrayal. The silence was heavy, broken only by my own footsteps and the sound of my breath. The search was meticulous, almost forensic. I scoured drawers, closets, shelves, looking for any clue, any piece of paper that could serve as a weapon in my defense. It was in an office drawer that I found something unexpected, proof of his boundless audacity, a fake lease agreement with my signature crudely forged. The intent was clear. He would use that document to claim rights to the property, a step ahead in his attempt to strip my daughter of everything. Rage rose in my head, hot and suffocating. His capacity for scheming, for deceit, was truly frightening. There seemed to be no limits to his cruelty, but fate, or perhaps my own persistence, had another discovery in store. At the bottom of the same drawer, under old and unimportant papers, lay a small leather-bound journal. My heart leapt. It wasn't my daughter's. The handwriting on the first page wasn't hers. It was his. A shiver ran down my spine, a mix of apprehension and hope. Was this the missing link? Was this the key to unraveling his whole game of lies? With trembling hands, I opened the journal. The first few pages were filled with trivialities, appointment notes, reminders. But as I read on, the devastating truth began to reveal itself. The pages were a mirror of his dark soul, a map of his ruin. He was drowning in gambling debts, with terrifying names and figures, names of dangerous people, lone sharks, whom he mentioned with a mix of fear and desperation. My stomach turned. With every line, every confession, the picture became clearer. He had never loved my daughter. She was just a solution, a walking ATM for his financial problems. The pain I felt reading that was profound, an invisible wound opening in my own heart, feeling the pain my daughter would feel if she knew. And the baby, my granddaughter, with her medical complications and special needs, was an expense his creditors wouldn't tolerate, an obstacle to be removed. His cruelty wasn't born of hate, of a twisted passion, but of the panic of a cornered man, desperate to survive in his own private hell. Possessing this journal should have been my great victory, the final weapon in my battle. But I knew he had another card up his sleeve. He was a cunning player, and his network of contacts, now driven by the pressure from his creditors, was vaster than I imagined. I knew he wouldn't give up so easily. The journal's revelation was a step, but not checkmate. And then, the phone rang. It was my new lawyer, his voice heavy with news I knew wouldn't be good. He had obtained a provisional court order, an order granting him supervised visits. The battle was intensifying. The monster was coming back, and this time, he was coming to my sanctuary. The real fight for my daughter's heart was about to begin, and I felt that even with the journal in hand, her vulnerability was my Achilles' heel. The fear that she would yield once more to his manipulation haunted me, a persistent shadow amidst my newfound weapon. The news of the supervised visits hit me like a bolt from the blue. The journal, which I had hoped would be my definitive weapon, suddenly seemed insufficient against the audacity and influence he still wielded. The court order was clear, though temporary, and it put me at a disadvantage. I, the protector, was now forced to allow the predator to approach my refuge, my nest. The icy panic I felt thinking about his first visit to the country house was almost unbearable. How would I explain the presence of this man to my daughter, who still defended the father of her baby? The first visit was a theater of horrors. He arrived accompanied by a social worker, his posture impeccable, and his face contorted into an expression of suffering. He entered the house with slow, almost reverent steps, as if stepping into a sacred temple. Upon seeing my daughter, he rushed towards her, his eyes welling with tears. Tears I knew were as fake as the promises he once made. He knelt, held her hands with dramatic intensity, and began his monologue of forgiveness. "My love, I was wrong," he murmured, his voice choked, full of a pain that seemed genuine to the less observant eye. I was a fool, a desperate man. The pressure of the debts consumed me. "But I love you. I love our daughter more than anything." His red, swollen eyes gazed at my daughter with an intensity that almost convinced me, for a second, of his sincerity. The social worker, who watched the scene with evident compassion in her eyes, seemed completely taken in by his performance. My daughter, still fragile and vulnerable, seemed to soak up his every word like a sponge. Her eyes, once so dull with sadness, began to sparkle with a glimmer of hope. I saw the wavering in her eyes, the undeniable desire to believe that the family of her dreams was still possible, that this man who had hurt her so much could somehow be the same man she had loved. It was an agonizing sight, like watching someone about to fall into an abyss and being powerless to stop them. Her heart, so pure and naive, was being torn apart once again. I watched the scene with a mixture of disgust and despair. I wanted to scream, to expose the truth of the journal, to show her the monster hiding beneath that facade of repentance. But I knew it wasn't the right time. She needed to see for herself, to awaken on her own, however painful the process might be. Intervening then, and there would only push her further away from me, solidifying the image of the controlling mother he painted. The battle, as I had foreseen, wouldn't be in the courts, but for the heart and mind of my daughter. It was a silent war, fought with emotions, memories, and subtle manipulations. He took the baby in his arms with a forced gentleness, kissing her small forehead with the air of a loving father. My granddaughter, oblivious to all the drama, remained asleep, an angel of peace amidst the storm. I watched his every move, his every expression. His eyes, for a brief moment, shifted to me, and I could see a glint of triumph, a subtle provocation that told me he knew what he was doing, that he was enjoying my agony. That look reminded me that I wasn't fighting a desperate man, but a cruel and calculating manipulator. After the visit, the silence that followed in the house was even heavier. My daughter retreated, lost in her own thoughts. I felt the distance growing between us, an invisible wall built by her indecision. She was in limbo, torn between the truth I was trying to show her and the illusion he was building. I knew I needed a stronger weapon, something irrefutable, something that could dismantle his entire charade once and for all. The journal, though revealing, could easily be contested as a fabrication. I needed something unquestionable, something that came from his own mouth. And as my mind raced for that key piece, a vague fragment of a memory, of an old renovation at the apartment, began to form, a small hope in the back of my mind that I barely dared to acknowledge. The custody hearing was approaching, and I felt that time was running out to find the evidence that would finally free my daughter and me from that web of lies. The feeling that time was running out was constant, an incessant ticking in my mind. Every day, I saw my daughter drift a little further away, the veil of his manipulation growing thicker. Her conversations with him, increasingly frequent, left her pensive, absorbed in a dangerous hope. I felt I was losing her, and the thought terrified me more than any legal threat. A mother's love is a shield, but also a weak point, and he knew how to exploit it. The custody hearing loomed like an inevitable storm. My new lawyers, though competent, were on the defensive. They had the journal, but as I feared, they warned that its authenticity could easily be challenged by a cunning defense. We needed something more, something irrefutable, that left no room for doubt. My nights were filled with insomnia, my mind sifting through every memory, every detail, searching for a clue, a light at the end of the tunnel. It was during one of those sleepless nights, while sorting through digital archives of old documents on my computer, that a flash of memory struck me. Years ago, when the luxury apartment, my daughter and his home, underwent a complete renovation. Ever cautious and accustomed to managing large projects, had installed a state-of-the-art security system. It wasn't just for intrusion detection. It was a complete system, including cameras and, crucially, audio. I had completely forgotten about it. At the time of installation, my concern was the security of the property, and back then, my daughter's privacy wasn't an issue. I never imagined that one day this precaution would become the key to her freedom. It was a needle in a haystack, I knew. Hours upon hours of recordings in the cloud, records of years of daily life. The thought of sifting through it all was daunting, but the hope that ignited in my chest was a beacon in the darkness. It was a risk, but a risk I was willing to take. With a mix of hope and anxiety, I began the search. Days turned into nights, my tired eyes fixed on the computer screen. I jumped from file to file, listening to fragments of conversations, household noises, laughter. The task was exhausting, but the image of my granddaughter, so small and innocent, and the lost look in my daughter's eyes, gave me the strength to continue. I could not fail. With every moment of silence in the recordings, my heart sank. Would it be in vain? Was I just deluding myself. Doubt was a constant shadow. But then, in the middle of a recording from weeks before my daughter's delivery, when her life and the baby's were still in danger, something caught my attention. A phone conversation. His voice, unmistakable. My hands trembled as I paused the recording. The audio was a bit muffled, but clear enough. He was talking to someone on the other end of the line. I turned up the volume, holding my breath. It was a call with a friend, apparently. And then, the words I so dreaded, but at the same time, represented my only chance. As soon as the baby is born, and I get her last big payout, I'm gone. This family life isn't for me. His voice, crystal clear, filled the room. There was no doubt. There was no way to contest it. It was the irrefutable proof, the naked truth that he had tried to hide with his charade of repentance. My whole body shook, not with anger, but with a mixture of relief and a deep pain for my daughter. This was the moment I had been searching for. The silver bullet in my arsenal. The recording ended there. I saved it, made backup copies, and immediately sent it to my lawyers, who were ecstatic. We had the proof. We had the truth. But still, the knot in my stomach wouldn't go away. How would my daughter react to hearing that? How would she bear the devastation of discovering the cruelty of the man she loved, to whom she had given a child? The victory in court was one step, but healing her heart would be the real battle. The hearing was set for the next day, and I knew that, no matter how prepared I was, the truth, when revealed, would be a brutal blow, a turning point that would change our lives forever, for better or for worse. The day of the custody hearing dawned gray, mirroring the storm brewing inside me. The courthouse was a labyrinth of cold hallways and imposing rooms, a stage where lives were decided. I sat beside my lawyers, my heart hammering against my ribs. My daughter was present. At her request, she sat a few rows behind me, pale and with a distant look in her eyes, but with a new firmness in her posture, perhaps a reflection of my own determination. I knew her presence was crucial, but I also feared the impact of the raw truth on her fragile state. He entered the courtroom with his usual theatrics, impeccable suit, perfectly styled hair, and a countenance that shifted between restrained sadness and controlled indignation. His lawyers, true sharks, began to present their case, building a narrative of a devoted father and wronged husband. They spoke of my daughter's emotional instability, of her and my granddaughter's kidnapping by me, of how he was the only stable figure in the child's life. Every word was a stab, distorting reality so convincingly that I felt the air leave my lungs. The evidence they presented was circumstantial but skillfully manipulated, creating an almost perfect image of a deranged mother and grandmother. He himself took the stand, his voice choked with false emotion. He described in moving detail his supposed devotion to my daughter and the baby. He wept, begged my daughter for forgiveness with a direct and penetrating gaze, a plea that almost made me believe his performance. I saw my daughter shrink slightly in her seat, her eyes fixed on him, a silent struggle taking place within her. The social worker, sitting in the front row, seemed moved by his testimony. My lawyers were on the defensive, trying to refute the accusations with logical arguments, but it was like fighting a wall of smoke. The tension in the room was palpable. I wrung my hands, cold sweat beading on my palms. The journal, though powerful, wouldn't be enough. It had to be the recording. I knew it was the only weapon that could tear down his entire charade. When it was my lawyers' turn to present our evidence, the most experienced of them stood up, his calm and steady voice cutting through the heavy air. He began to speak of the manipulation, the debts, the father's true character. The judge listened attentively, but I could feel his eyes still lingering on the emotion my son-in-law had displayed. Then, my lawyer motioned to his assistant. A small audio device was connected, a strange, almost prophetic silence fell over the room. He didn't mention the journal. He didn't try to refute his lies point by point. He went straight for the kill. Your Honor, we have a piece of evidence we believe is crucial to this case. An audio recording made in the apartment where the respondent resided with the petitioner weeks before the birth. We believe it will reveal the gentleman's true intentions and character. My son-in-law's face went white. His eyes, once full of self-confidence, now showed a growing panic. He tried to object, stammering something about invasion of privacy. But the judge, intrigued, signaled for the audio to be played. The sound filled the room, a light hiss at first, followed by his voice, unmistakable. As soon as the baby is born and I get her last big payout, I'm gone. This family life isn't for me. The sentence echoed, crystal clear, in the shocked quiet of the courtroom. Each word, each syllable, a direct hit. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, almost deafening. My son-in-law's face didn't just pale. It lost all color, as if the blood had drained from it. His mouth opened, but no words came out. His mask didn't just fall. It shattered into 1,000 pieces, revealing the monster, the predator, the cruel manipulator he truly was. He shrank in his seat, his lawyers beside him, paralyzed. But the image seared into my mind, the most painful and yet most liberating, was of my daughter's face. She, who heard everything up close, brought her hands to her mouth, her eyes welling, wide with horror and disbelief. I saw the pain on her face, a terrible pain to witness, but it was the pain of truth. That pain was what would finally set her free, the final blow to the illusion that had imprisoned her. It was a turning point, yes, but the scar it would leave on her, I knew, would be deep and slow to heal. And as I watched her, I felt a wave of compassion and determination. The war was not yet over, but the biggest battle, the one for her heart, had just been won, though the emotional price was steep. What would come next, I did not know, but the firm ground beneath our feet, however shaken, was beginning to reform. The silence in the courtroom after the recording seemed to stretch for an eternity, broken only by the heavy breathing of a few people present. My daughter, motionless in her seat, stared into the void, as if her soul had been torn from her body. Her face, once a reflection of confusion and hope, was now a canvas of shock and desolation. I felt a tightness in my chest, a vicarious pain for every fragment of her illusion that was shattering. I wanted to hold her, to shield her from the cruelty of that truth, but I knew she had to face reality to heal. The judge, an experienced man with a serious demeanor, cleared his throat. His voice, when he spoke, was grave and unquestionable. In light of the evidence presented, especially this undeniable recording, it is clear that the respondent's claims are baseless. He turned to my son-in-law, who was pale and shrunken. The court finds that the respondent's conduct demonstrates bad faith and a clear intent to manipulate. Your accusations against the child's mother and grandmother are entirely unfounded. Justice was served. He lost everything. Custody, of course, but also any claim to my daughter's assets. The judge ordered that all financial transfers be investigated and restitution made, and that he would have no visitation rights, at least for an indefinite period, until his situation was re-evaluated and he demonstrated the psychological and moral fitness to be near the child. The final blow, the most important one, was that he lost his power over us, the control he had wielded so insidiously. It was a victory, yes, but a bittersweet one. The happy ending wasn't a loud celebration, like in the movies. It was the quiet peace that settled over the country house, a refuge that now felt truly our own. But the healing would be a long and painful process. My daughter, in the days that followed, was like a sleepwalker. She barely spoke, her eyes reflecting a deep sadness. I tried to be present, to offer my support without smothering her. I cooked her favorite meals, helped her with the baby, but I knew the emotional wound was hers to heal, and that time would be her greatest ally. The little one, my granddaughter, was a balm amidst the pain. Her small cries, her toothless smiles, her innocence were constant reminders of the life that was blossoming, of the hope I needed to cultivate. Seeing my daughter hold her baby, not with fear, but with the strength that was beginning to emerge within her, was the greatest reward. I saw a glimpse of the strong woman she was, who was starting to break free from his shadow. The fragility was still there, but now it was accompanied by a new resilience. We began to rebuild, brick by brick. The first phase was acceptance. My daughter, slowly, began to verbalize her pain, her questions. "How could he, Mom?" she would ask, her voice choked. "I loved him so much. I believed everything. I listened, held her hand, and answered with the truth, but always with gentleness, without judgment. My love, you were the victim of a well-crafted lie. It wasn't your fault. The fault is all his." Slowly, she began to revisit the memories, but now in a new light. The torn photos from the wedding album, once proof of his betrayal, were now a symbol of her liberation. The fake contract, the hole in her savings, all of it, once a mystery, became concrete proof of the coldness with which he had used her. It was painful, but necessary. Every discovery, however distressing, was a step toward healing, one less layer of the illusion that had enveloped her. I, alongside them, finally understood that my greatest empire was not made of properties or money, but of the unshakable love that bound us, a bond forged in the fire of the deepest betrayal and rebuilt with the courage of 3 generations of women. It was a love that would not bend, that would withstand any adversity. The country house, once a refuge, was transforming into a home of healing, of renewed hope. And as my daughter began to lift her head, a new certainty washed over me. This journey, however painful, was just beginning to transform us, to strengthen us in ways we could never have imagined. The legal battle was over, but the journey of healing and rediscovery was just beginning, and I knew there would be many emotional challenges ahead, testing our strength and our unity. The days at the country house unfolded in a routine of healing and rediscovery. The silence, once heavy with the shadow of betrayal, was now filled with the sweet sounds of the baby and the conversations, once rare, that began to emerge between my daughter and me. She still had her moments of withdrawal, of silent tears, but with each passing day, a small piece of her former vitality seemed to return. I watched her patiently, like one watches a flower blooming again after a storm. Most of my time was devoted to my granddaughter. Her small gestures, her uninhibited laughter, were a constant reminder of the purity and innocence that life could offer. I held her, rocked her, told her stories, and felt my own heart, once hardened by battle, soften with the warmth of her little body. She was the reason we fought, the hope that guided us. One afternoon, while I was in the kitchen preparing lunch and my granddaughter slept peacefully in her bassinet, my daughter came downstairs. She seemed lighter, a hint of a smile on her lips. "Mom, can I talk to you?" she asked, her voice low but steady. I felt a shiver of anticipation. I knew this was the moment I had been waiting for. We sat on the porch, facing the garden, where the flowers were beginning to bloom, a mirror of the renewal I hoped for us. The air was fresh, the birdsong gentle. She began to speak, not with anger, but with a deep and reflective sadness. I still can't believe he did that he was capable of such cruelty." Her voice broke, but she continued. "I feel so naive, Mom. How could I not see it? How could I love someone like that?" I took her hand, squeezing it gently. "My love, don't blame yourself. He is a master of manipulation. He wrapped you in a web of lies and false promises. Your love was real, and he took advantage of that. It doesn't make you naive. It makes you a good-hearted person. And there is nothing wrong with that. She looked into my eyes, a silent gratitude mixed with her pain. Slowly, the conversation flowed. She told me about small signs she had ignored, about how he always avoided talking about their future, about the way he pressured her for money, always with convincing excuses. She revisited every memory, every dialogue, and each one now fit with what the journal and the recording had revealed. It was a painful process of disillusionment, but it was essential for her freedom. It was as if the scales were falling from her eyes, one by one. "I have to be strong for her, Mom," she said, pointing toward the window where the baby slept. "I can't let this story define me. I can't let his pain stop me from being the mother she deserves." Her eyes shone with a renewed determination, a fire I hadn't seen in her for a long time. That was the moment, the turning point I had so hoped for, not in a courtroom, but in her heart. That afternoon, my daughter began to make her own plans for the future, no longer searching for a love that had proven to be a sham, but focused on herself and her daughter. She wanted to resume her studies, invest in her career, create a safe and happy environment for the baby. I listened with pride, feeling a wave of hope wash over me. The wound was still there, but the healing was well underway. I knew there would be setbacks, moments of doubt and sadness, but now she was not alone. We were together, facing the future, building a new life from the rubble of the past. The love and unity of our family were our fortress, our greatest treasure. The journey was still long, but the direction was clear. And as the sun set, dyeing the sky in shades of orange and purple, I felt a deep peace. The certainty that we had come through the worst, and that, together, we would be able to overcome any obstacle life still had in store for us, turning pain into strength and betrayal into a solid foundation for a new beginning. The truth, however painful, had set us free. The following months were a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The country house, once an emergency refuge, became our permanent sanctuary, a place where the past was processed and the future was built with hope. My daughter, whom I feared had been lost in her grief, blossomed with each passing day. She was not the same naive person as before. There was a new depth in her gaze, a quiet strength in her posture. She dove into her studies with surprising dedication, determined to finish the college degree she had abandoned to follow his dreams. Her nights were divided between books, papers, and caring for the baby, who was growing healthy and full of life. I would watch her studying, the lamplight illuminating her focused face, and feel immense pride. It wasn't just about getting a degree. It was about reclaiming her autonomy, her identity, stolen for so long. Our relationship, once marked by a protective dynamic on my part and a subtle dependence on hers, matured. We talked openly about everything, from the deepest fears to the small dreams of daily life. She asked for my advice, but also expressed her own opinions, her new perspectives. I watched her make her own decisions, making mistakes and learning, and I rejoiced with every step toward her independence. She was my daughter, yes, but now she was a woman on the rise, forged in pain and overcoming. The little one, my granddaughter, was the joy of the house. Her first smiles, her first words, her first steps, each was a miracle, a reminder that life went on, full of possibilities. She was our ray of sunshine, the link that bound us, the living proof that love, true love, always prevailed. I spent hours with her, teaching her about the flowers in the garden, reading storybooks, laughing at her antics. She taught me to see the world with new eyes, with the purity and simplicity of a child. There were still difficult moments, of course. Painful memories resurfaced, Unexpected triggers caused waves of sadness in my daughter, but she didn't let them defeat her. She had learned to recognize these feelings, to process them, to seek comfort in me, in her daughter, and in her own inner strength. She sought professional help, talking to a therapist, and that was a huge step in her healing journey. She was facing her demons head-on, with a courage that inspired me. News of him, my ex-son-in-law, was scarce, but no less disturbing. My lawyers informed me that he was facing serious financial and legal troubles, not only because of the restitution he had to pay my daughter, but also because of the gambling debts that had cornered him. Justice, though late, was doing its work, and he was reaping what he had sown. I felt no pleasure in his suffering, only a cold realization that the law of return is often relentless. One day, while we were sorting through old things in a dusty attic, my daughter found a box of old photos. There were portraits of my grandmother, my mother, and me at different stages of life. Strong women, every one of them, who had faced their own battles and emerged victorious. "Mom," she said, holding a photo of me when I was young, with the same determined look I now saw in her. "I get it now. I understand your strength. I understand where mine comes from." In that moment, I felt a deep connection to the generations of women who came before us, a lineage of resilience, of courage, of unwavering love. My daughter was becoming part of that lineage, not as a victim, but as a survivor, a warrior, and I, by her side, felt complete. My business empire was just a sandcastle compared to the richness of what we had built together, a future of hope, a home of unconditional love. The healing journey was far from over, but the foundation for a full and happy life had been solidified, and I knew the future held even more transformations and surprising discoveries for us, and one of them was about to happen in a way I never expected. The country house, once silent and a bit melancholic, now resonated with life. Laughter, conversations, and the babbling of the baby filled every room. My daughter, now more confident and radiant, had returned to the university, and the mornings were a flurry of preparations. I devoted myself to my granddaughter, enjoying every moment, every discovery. I believed that the worst of the storm had passed, that a calm had finally settled. But life, as always, had its own twists in store. One day, while my daughter and I were in the garden, she watched me with a thoughtful gaze. "Mom, I have something to tell you," she said, her voice a little hesitant, but with a sparkle in her eyes that intrigued me. My heart skipped a beat. I encouraged her to continue, feeling a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "I met someone at school," she confessed, a slight blush on her cheeks. My first instinct was caution. The past was still fresh, the wounds still tender, but I looked at her expression. There wasn't the same glint of blind passion I had seen before, but rather a serenity, a quiet joy. "He's very different," she continued, as if reading my thoughts. "He's kind and smart, and he sees me. He sees who I am, not what I can offer." She told me about him, a classmate who helped her with the tougher subjects, who listened without judgment, who made her laugh with a lightness I hadn't seen in her for years. My heart, despite my caution, felt a sense of relief. She was opening herself up to life again, to the possibility of new affection. But this time, with her eyes wide open, weeks later, he visited her at the country house, a calm man with a gentle smile and expressive eyes. He wasn't flamboyant like my ex-son-in-law. He didn't exhibit an artificial charm. Instead, he showed a simplicity and sincerity that were captivating. I watched him interact with my daughter, with the baby. He was attentive, patient, and his eyes filled with genuine affection when he saw the little one. There was no rush in his gestures, no hidden interest in his words. He seemed content just to be there, to be a part of the little universe we had built. His interaction with the baby touched me deeply. He held her with a naturalness that surprised me, played with her, and the little one, who was usually a bit reserved with strangers, smiled at him with an ease that warmed my heart. I saw my daughter relax in his presence, the tension in her shoulders easing. It was as if, for the first time in a long time, she could be truly herself, without masks or defenses. We talked for a bit. He told me about his dreams, his passion for his studies, his family. His humility and kindness were palpable. I felt a glimmer of hope, a small flame lighting in my chest. Maybe, just maybe, the universe was finally compensating my daughter for all the pain she had endured. His presence in the house brought a new energy. My daughter's joy was contagious. She laughed more, sang more, and her eyes shone with a light I hadn't seen since before the nightmare. The baby, in turn, seemed to benefit from the atmosphere of peace and happiness. It was as if the house was healing all our wounds. However, even with this new happiness, caution still lingered. I knew that healing was an ongoing process, and that trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. I watched every move, every word, every gesture. I would not let my daughter be hurt again, not if I could help it. One night, as we talked on the porch under the stars, my daughter said to me, "Mom, I know you're worried, and I appreciate that, but this time, it's different. I've learned, and he makes me feel safe. He makes me feel like I can trust again." Her words brought me a profound relief. It was a sign that she was growing, that she was learning to discern, to protect herself. Life was giving her a second chance, and she was ready to embrace it. And in my heart, I knew she was right. The path to full happiness was opening up for my daughter again, and I was there, steadfast by her side, to support her every step of the way. But what we didn't expect was a shadow from the past that still lingered and was about to manifest itself in an unexpected way, testing our new fortress and the resilience we had built. The lightness that had settled over the country house was a balm to my soul. My daughter, in her new relationship, seemed to have found a safe harbor, and the joy she radiated was contagious. I saw in her the woman she was meant to be all along, strong, intelligent, and full of life. But as life likes to remind us, peace is often just an interlude between new storms. The shadow of the past, which I had hoped had dissipated, made an unexpected appearance. It wasn't him directly, but a trail of his reckless actions. One day, I received a call from my lawyers. Their voices were tense. "Helena, we need to talk. It's about your ex-son-in-law. He's in serious trouble, and it could affect us." My blood ran cold. I thought we had closed that chapter. The meeting with the lawyers revealed a new knot in the web. His gambling debts had escalated to astronomical levels, and his creditors, those dangerous people he had mentioned in his journal, were now collecting aggressively. To make matters worse, he had tried to use the fake lease agreement I had found to secure a hefty loan, claiming to be the owner of the apartment that legally belonged to me. His audacity was limitless. The creditors, frustrated and willing to use any means to recover their money, had discovered the fraudulent contract. In their fury, they threatened not only him, but also, in a veiled way, me and my family, as our name was somehow linked to the property he had tried to use as collateral. It was an indirect but real threat, a chill down my spine that reminded me that justice wasn't always enough to contain the consequences of irresponsible acts. My lawyers explained that while I was legally blameless, the situation was delicate. The fallout could be devastating, not just for my image, but for the safety of my daughter and granddaughter. It was an indirect attack, a dark cloud hanging over my daughter's newfound happiness. I felt the old, cold fury begin to bubble up again, but this time, it was different. It wasn't just for revenge. but out of an urgent need to protect my clan. I didn't tell my daughter right away. I wanted to spare her the worry, the anxiety, but my mind worked ceaselessly, searching for a solution. I couldn't let this shadow from the past ruin everything we had rebuilt. I needed to act, and fast, before the situation escalated and hit us directly. The presence of my daughter's new boyfriend, however, brought an unexpected perspective. He, a law student, noticed my unease and gently asked if something was wrong. I hesitated, but decided to share part of the story, the complexity of the situation involving the debts and the indirect threats. To my surprise, he showed no fear or revulsion. Instead, his eyes lit up with a glint of determination. "Helena, please, let me help," he asked, with a seriousness that impressed me. I know I'm not an experienced lawyer, but I'm learning. I can do research. I can help find loopholes, map out a strategy, and most importantly, I'm part of your family now. I can't just stand by while you face this. His words touched me deeply. It was a gesture of altruism, of loyalty, that contrasted painfully with the betrayal we had suffered. I saw in him not just a boyfriend for my daughter, but an ally, a member of our family. He wasn't running from the problem. He was offering to face it with us. Together, my lawyers, the young man, and I began to map out a plan. The situation was complex, requiring not only legal knowledge, but also an understanding of the financial world's nuances and, unfortunately, of veiled threats. I felt a renewed sense of hope. We weren't alone. The threat was real, but our unity, our intelligence, and our determination would be even stronger. And as we worked on the details, I knew that this new battle, however frightening, would bring us even closer, strengthening the bonds we had built, turning every challenge into a new layer of resilience and love. The true test of our strength was about to unfold, not in a courtroom, but in the complexity of life itself. The collaboration with the young aspiring lawyer was a breath of fresh air. He brought a renewed energy and a perspective that complemented my lawyer's experience. We spent hours in meetings, analyzing documents, mapping out strategies. My daughter, whom I feared would be crushed by the news, showed surprising maturity. Instead of panic, she had a quiet resolve, a determination to protect herself and her daughter. She listened, asked pertinent questions, and even suggested solutions. It was living proof of her transformation. The strategy that emerged was bold and multifaceted. First, we had to isolate the problem. My lawyers issued strongly worded legal notices to the creditors, making it clear that I bore no responsibility for my ex-son-in-law's debts, and that any attempt to involve us would be met with the most rigorous legal action. At the same time, the young lawyer, with his research expertise, discovered a legal loophole that allowed us to reinforce the title to the apartment, shielding it from any future attempts at appropriation by him or his creditors. It was a masterstroke that disarmed one of the main threats. The second line of attack was more delicate. We needed to neutralize his influence once and for all. Based on the new information about his debts and the threats he had attracted, my lawyers secured a new, more comprehensive court order. The order not only confirmed full custody of my granddaughter and prohibited any contact, but also established a minimum distance he had to maintain from us. The argument was based on safety, and the evidence of his involvement with dangerous people was crucial in obtaining this protective measure. The final hearing, though less dramatic than the first, was equally significant. He was there, thinner, and with a dull, defeated look in his eyes. His lawyers barely put up a defense, aware of the mountain of evidence against him. The judge, with a grave expression, confirmed all our requests. He not only lost any shred of contact with my family, but was also forbidden from coming near us. Justice, this time, didn't just unmask him. It removed him from our lives. The relief I felt leaving that courthouse was indescribable, as if an immense weight had been lifted from my shoulders. My daughter hugged me tightly, her eyes welling with tears, but this time they were tears of gratitude and a deep peace. "It's over, Mom," she whispered, and I knew she wasn't just talking about the legal battle, but about the shadow that had loomed over her heart. Back at the country house, life resumed with a new fullness. My daughter, with the support of her boyfriend, continued her studies with fervor, envisioning a promising future. She had found a new purpose, a new direction, and the love in her heart was a mature, conscious love built on truth and respect. The young man, who had been an invaluable pillar of support, was now an integral part of our family, not just as my daughter's boyfriend, but as a son to me, a brother to us. His presence brought not only legal aid, but also a joy and energy that enriched our lives. The baby grew every day, and her first steps were celebrated with a mix of laughter and tears. It was watching life manifest in its purest form, a constant reminder that even after darkness, the light always returns. I devoted myself to them, to my family, feeling a happiness that surpassed any business success I had ever had. My greatest empire was not what I had built with bricks and money, but what we had rebuilt with love, resilience, and the unbreakable strength of family ties. The main conflicts were resolved. His threat had been neutralized, my daughter's autonomy restored, and peace finally reigned in our home. I looked at my daughter, at the strong and inspiring woman she had become, and at my granddaughter, laying on the rug, oblivious to all the drama, and I knew we had won, not through wealth or power, but through the truth and the love that united us. The journey had been arduous, but every scar was a reminder of our strength, our ability to overcome, and I felt that for us. The true happy ending was not a final stop, but a beautiful new beginning. The revelations had transformed us, and life, no matter how much it tested us, offered us a new chance to build a lasting happiness, paved with the wisdom of our experiences. The gentle afternoon breeze caressed my face as I watched my granddaughter play in the garden of the country house. Her crystal-clear laughter echoed, mingling with the birdsong, and every sound was a melody of peace to my soul. My daughter sat beside me, reading a book on child development, her eyes now filled with a serenity I had so longed for her to have. Beside her, the young man who had become part of our family, now her fiancé, discussed with her the next steps for renovating a small cottage at the back of the property, which would soon be their home. The scene was the very picture of happiness, of the completeness we had fought so hard to achieve. I reflected on the journey, on the hellish month that had felt like a lifetime, on the sleepless nights, the courtroom battles, and the even greater battles fought in our hearts. I remembered the scent of antiseptic in the hospital, the coldness in my ex-son-in-law's eyes, the cutting words that had nearly destroyed me. The pain was still a memory, but now it was a scar that told a story of survival, not defeat. My daughter, once trapped in a web of manipulation and denial, had emerged as a strong, independent woman. She not only resumed her studies but excelled, with a sparkle in her eyes that signaled a renewed passion for life. The healing process was long and punctuated by moments of relapse, but her resilience propelled her forward. She learned to trust again, but this time, with discernment, with the wisdom of one who has known darkness. Her love for her fiancé was mature, built on mutual respect, admiration, and a deep understanding. He saw her for who she was, and that was all a mother could wish for her daughter. Our relationship, once focused on protection and struggle, had transformed into a partnership of mutual support. She confided her dreams, her worries, and I, in turn, found in her a confidant and a source of inspiration. The little one, my granddaughter, was the center of our universe, the living symbol of our hope, Every new milestone in her development was celebrated with joy, and I delighted in watching her grow in an environment of love and security, far from the shadows of the past. The empire I had built with such effort, with properties and businesses, now seemed to have a completely new dimension. I realized that true wealth was not in my bank accounts or my investments, but in the bonds that united us, the unconditional love we shared, the loyalty we had cultivated, the strength we had found in each other. That was my greatest legacy. I had built an empire of love and resilience, forged in the fire of the deepest betrayal, and rebuilt with the courage of 3 generations of women. The challenges we faced transformed us. They taught us about the importance of family, about the selflessness of rising above one's own pain to protect those we love. They showed us the justice that sometimes tarries but does not fail, and the human capacity for overcoming. The connection we built, my daughter and I, and now with the inclusion of her fiancé and the love for my granddaughter, was indestructible. The end of the story was not a fairy tale, free of scars. It was a real conclusion, full of nuances and lessons learned. There was no magic wand to erase the pain, but there was a process of healing, of self-discovery, and of renewal. The message that emerges from all this is one of hope. Even in the face of the greatest adversities, of the deepest betrayal, it is possible to find the light,